Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Plan, Procure, and Deploy a PIV-Enabled PACS. This is a Secure Technology Alliance, Educational Institute, and Access Control Council webinar series. And it's the fifth in a series of these webinars. And today's topic is going to be on implementing the solution. Hello, my name is Randy Vanderhoof, and I'm the Executive Director of the Secure Technology Alliance, formerly known as the Smart Card Alliance. And today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback along with the presentation deck after the webinar has been concluded. Also, there'll be time at the end for questions, so I encourage listeners to submit their questions using the user dashboard on your screen. And I'll return at the end of the presentation to lead the question and answer period. And I encourage you to submit your questions while the presentations are being heard, so that we have an opportunity to receive your questions and organize them so we can get to as many of those as possible in the time that we have left at the end of the webinar. So next slide. Let me introduce the other presenters on today's webinar. We have Lars Suneborn, who is the Director of Training Programs for the Alliance, a former chair of our Access Control Council, and prior to joining the Alliance, spent many years as a PACS system engineer, sales, and security expert for several global security organizations. We also have Mark Dale, who is a certified CSCIP and CSEIP and is Senior Systems Engineer at XTech Incorporated. He's engaged in the development of applied identity, credential, and access control systems. And as a systems architect, Mr. Dale contributed to the development of baseline implementations of PIV issuance and management solutions employed by a large portion of the U.S. government agencies. And then we have Tony Damalis, who is responsible for the Identity, Credential, and Access Management Division of Signet Technologies and serves as a subject matter expert for all ICAM, FICAM opportunities. Signet is a convergent technologies company and a security systems integration company headquartered in Washington, D.C. area since 2006. All three of these gentlemen are active participants in the Secure Technology Alliance Access Control Council, one of the many councils operating within the Alliance. Next slide. So for those of you who are joining today who are not familiar with the Secure Technology Alliance, here's a brief overview of the organization. So the Alliance is a not-for-profit multi-industry association working to stimulate the understanding, adoption, and widespread application of secure solutions. And we provide, in a collaborative, member-driven environment, education and information on how smart cards and embedded chip technology and related hardware and software can be adopted across all markets in the United States. Now that's a fairly broad mission, but if you look on the right side of the screen, you'll see that the principal markets that we focus these activities towards include access control, which is the subject of today's webinar, also authentication, healthcare, identity management, Internet of Things, mobile, payments, and transportation. So we do cut across a wide variety of industry vertical markets that utilize this secure technology. And as a cross-industry member-supported organization, we do many of the following things to bring our industry together, including bringing stakeholders to effectively collaborate on promoting secure solutions, technology, and addressing industry challenges. We publish white papers, webinars like today, workshops, newsletters, conferences, and web resources. We offer educational programs, including training and industry certifications, and provide networking opportunities for professionals to share ideas and knowledge and produce strong industry communications through our public relations, web resources, and social media. If you go to the next slide, we'll drill down to specifically about the work of the Access Control Council within the Secure Technology Alliance. And it focuses on accelerating and widespread acceptance, use, and application of secure technologies in various form factors for physical and logical access control. And this group brings together in an open forum leading users and technologists for both public and private sectors. On the right side, you'll see some of the examples of what this group has produced, including white papers, reports, and guidance documents on various ID credentialing technologies. Some of them I'd like to point out are particularly relevant to today's audience, including the FICAM roadmap and implementation guidance, understanding the FIPS 201 standards for use and access control, guidance for architect and engineers to implement PACs for non-government, role of smart cards and use of biometrics and access control systems, paper on logical access control, and using the PIV credentialing on mobile devices. And we welcome you to look up some of those resources and review them at your leisure. Okay, the next slide. And so now let me turn this over to Lars Suneborn, who is first up to talk about the National Training Center and its training programs. Lars?
Thank you, Randy. Next slide, please. So I am in the Center for Advanced Payment and Identity Security in Crystal City, and here is where we run the Educational Institute that is organizing these series of webinars. Other certifications that we deal with here are CSCIP, that stands for Certified Smart Card Industry Professional. It's a wide-ranging certification that covers fundamental topics such as smart card manufacturing, security, and operating system and some applications. It is a similar certification that is focused on payments, similar fundamentals, but payment focused. Focus on payment terminals, payment networks, providers, payment processing companies, credit card issuers, and so on and so forth. CSCIP-G uses the same basic fundamentals, but use cases here are specifically tailored to the federal government use cases. Credentialing, identity management, lifecycle management, credentialing, and certificate management, and PKI is part of that. CSEIP, that stands for Certified System Engineer ICAM PACs, and that is where the card technologies and identity technologies merged and are used in physical access control systems. It is a 3-day course that covers both lecture, policies, whys and hows, and hands-on. It's an extensive hands-on session. And the growing number of agencies have this certification as a prerequisite for companies to participate in even bidding on federal access control projects. Next slide, please. OMB, the latest OMB document that states that physical access control systems are now part of the federal IT infrastructures is OMB A130. It has been a policy for quite some time, but this is a modernized and updated copy. And I encourage you on the call here today to download that OMB A130 dated 2016. So the previous series of sessions, next slide, please. We have talked about facility characterization. So the first of the actual action sessions is where we did the risk and threat assessment of the facility. The next session, where the agency defined a project scope for the access control project. The next session, the agency developed a procurement strategy. And in this session, we're going to talk about the actual deployment and implementation of a compliant access control system. And with this, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and hand this over to Mark Dale of XTech.
All right, thank you, Lars, and good afternoon, everyone. To start off with this first slide, we'll set the stage for this session with the carryover from session 4, which Lars just touched on, was a procurement strategy. So what we have here is a sample set of requirements that we might inherit from a contract award from a federal agency or a commercial entity or company interested in PIV-related PACs. And on that note, this presentation provides a lot of focus on federal agencies, but there is also a lot of applicable carryover for commercial PIV and PIV-Enabled PACs. So keep that in mind if your interest is on the commercial side. In either case, the requirements list that we've shown here would be a result of a solicitation process that included a request for proposal responses from vendors, and a resulting contract award. And hopefully, along with these requirements and that process, we would inherit a usable set of requirements analysis and design that the proposal team did when they bid on the contract. So these areas, as shown, are at a high level: the contract requirements, GSA schedule requirements, technical requirements, and security requirements. And we'll go into details on each one of these as we move through the presentation and the requirements. Next slide, please. So this presentation is organized around a version of a standard project life cycle methodology with a set of phases. So as you can see, we have a planning, design, install, testing, and operations and maintenance phase. I will be discussing the first two phases, planning and design, and Tony DeMollis will cover the install, testing, and O&M phases. And as you can see, within each of these phases are sets of tasks, and then we'll touch on these bulleted items as we walk through each phase. Next slide, please. So in the planning phase, we have here, we got to establish the project team. We're going to be analyzing the requirements that come from the proposal and from other sources. We're going to create a schedule with deliverables and milestones. We need to identify dependencies and responsibilities and support from internal and external resources. Develop a plan for being able to communicate for monitoring and reporting with the client and stakeholders, planning for materials and equipment acquisition, and then also planning for any requirements for security and privacy assessments. Next slide, please. So here we have an example of an organization chart for the project team. We have the project manager, of course, who has oversight of supporting teams on the project that include the technical and administrative personnel, security personnel, and installation personnel. And the project manager also has a responsibility for being the liaison and communications focus to the client-side program manager or system owner, who also, as you can see, has a set of team players. Overall, these roles are straightforward. I'm not going to detail all of them, but I just want to point out one in particular is the CS EIP that Lars had mentioned as far as what Security Technology Alliance offers. But there is a requirement from GSA Schedule 70 and 84 that the delivery team is required to have at least one certified CS EIP on board. As for the rest of the staffing, what we have here, the project may not require all of these roles. It'll vary from the scope of the project. And then also multiple roles could be handled by a single person. And then also keeping in focus, many of the roles do not necessarily require a full-time effort throughout the entire project. They will be pulled in and let go as needed. So, next slide, please. So the next set of slides are focused on the requirements analysis tasking that we had identified in the first bullet list when we talked about the planning phase. So we start with the GSA schedule requirements. In the previous session 4 webinar, the presenters went through into some detail of the relevance of GSA schedules, Schedule 70 and 84. We just included this information again as a reference that can be used when this presentation is posted online. But I just want to point out also that, as I mentioned previously, where the requirement is, for the CSA IP on that last SIN special item number at the bottom of the slide. And also at the very bottom of the slide is a link to the GSA PACS ordering guide, and that's the federal agencies, they would be using to prepare the requirements and language for a PACS RFP. So that's obviously beneficial to the buyers and the vendors for a PACS solution. Next slide, please. Credential types, pretty straightforward, but worth mentioning. The common PIV-related PACS credentials are, of course, PIV, PIV-I, and the PIV versions of the DoD Common Access Card. But clients may also have requirements for other credentials, usually some short-term credentials, such as temporary cards and visitor cards and potential other variants. So the PACS configuration may be required to handle these variants, and the scope of the system may have to deal with various interfaces and authorization requirements that differ from the PIV standards. Next slide, please. In this slide, we're addressing some fundamental PACS infrastructure characteristics. Just to go over them, we have the installation type, connectivity, enterprise integration, and hosting. For the installation type, the project may involve PIV enabling an existing legacy PACS system or installing an entirely new PACS. For connectivity, the PACS or parts of it may be standalone with no network connectivity, or it may be connected to an agency or client network with a gateway to the internet. For enterprise integration, the PACS may be provisioned by some external authoritative identity or PIV data source, such as an identity management system, or a specific PIV credential issuer's card management system. For hosting, the PACS may be hosted and supported within an agency or a client data center, or it could be hosted in the cloud, in a commercial cloud or a commercial FedRAMP cloud service offering. Next slide, please. So we have here on this slide some variance samples for PACS topologies based on the infrastructure characteristics that we talked about in the previous slide. And number one here, we have the standalone configuration, where it's an isolated PACS with no outside connectivity. This has been the traditional configuration for PACS all these years before the option to connect to an organization's network and the internet. But even now, there are still highly sensitive areas and facilities that an organization might deem sensitive enough that it doesn't want to risk external connection that could be vulnerable to unauthorized access or hacking attacks. So standalone PACS won't necessarily be going by the wayside. In the second example, we have the network configuration. The advantages for external connectivity here are being able to manage the PACS from office desktops within the agency networks or client networks, and being able to access external certificate authorities to validate the PIV card digital certificates. In the third configuration, enterprise PACS, we might enhance the network configuration with capabilities to provision the PACS with identities and or PIV card data from an external data source, as I mentioned previously. And then in the fourth configuration, the cloud solution, the PACS head-end is external to the client network, but with remote interfaces to things like PACS controllers and readers within the client boundary, and with possible provisioning support from the client-side authoritative data sources. Next slide, please. Here we dive a little bit deeper into the advantages of a network PACS. I've touched on these and probably in too much detail, but here just to reiterate, the first advantage is validating digital certificates, where during authentication, digital certificates can be validated by accessing online OCSP responders and certificate revocation lists provided by certificate authorities. If the PACS is not connected, then an administrator will have to sneakernet CRLs into the PACS once or twice a day to be conformant with FIPS 201. The second advantage of a network PACS is PACS provisioning, where, again, identities and PIV card data can be provisioned into the PACS from an external source. If that's not available, then PIV cards have to be registered locally and harvested locally within the PACS. Next slide, please. So there may be options here for interoperability. Interoperability expands on requirements for network PACS where there's a need to accept PIV cards issued by other agencies or business entities, PIV and PIV-I. There are many agencies that share personnel with other agencies, and they need to accept the external agency's PIV cards or allow to use PIV-I cards from businesses doing work with the agency. And a good example here is also GSA. So keep this in mind. I mean, the GSA manages buildings throughout the federal government where offices are leased to other agencies. So there are buildings whose tenants are from multiple agencies, and the building has a single PACS system that has to manage all these clients and the PIV cards, within that same PACS system from different agencies. So not only from the different agencies, but the PIV cards themselves could be issued by different PIV credentialing systems, and then also those particular cards and credentialing system issuance would entail different certificate authorities. And as hopefully everybody knows, that we have, different versions of PIV credential issuers within GSA, DHS, HHS, and EPA as an example. So that's just a basis. So there's a lot of variables from where PIV cards can come from. Next slide, please. The project requirements might entail PIV enabling an existing legacy PACS. So this has actually been done on a large scale at many agencies that have distributed facilities all over the U.S. and overseas. Each of these facilities usually have a different PACS system based on different PACS products, and some facilities may have more than one PACS system running the facility. So PIV enabling can be tricky for those PACS that are, at least ones that are upgradable. So there are some older mom and pop PACS around for many decades that just can't be PIV enabled. They have to be replaced entirely. So the slide just touches on, those areas where what we know and what might not have to be upgraded. So we'll have to definitely replace readers, and then we'll have to install new software that can handle PIV cards. And it might involve doing rewiring, putting in new control panels or intermediate nodes, and then also certainly new head-end equipment. Next slide, please. This topic is worth mentioning here for upgrading a PACS system that's already been PIV enabled in the past, but the idea, the concept that there's possibility of vulnerabilities being exposed with some existing PACS or PIV enabled PACS. So relatively early on, when PIV cards started being issued, many agencies started upgrading and installing PIV-enabled PACS that just did CHUIT authentication through the contactless interface. And at that time, these PACS were considered to be PIV compliant, and then the agencies could report to OMB that they were meeting HSPD 12 implementation mandates. So understanding using the CHUIT as an identifier provided the same user experience as using a legacy RFID access card. So it was attractive to use this for the user and the organization. But it became clear that the CHUIT provided no more security than the RFID tag, and the CHUIT is more actually easily clonable than an RFID tag. So in 2003, FIPS 201-2 deprecated the CHUD as an approved authentication mechanism. And with this and the abundant selection of PIV card readers on the GSA PL, agencies may and should in some cases contract for upgrading these packs to use stronger PIV authentication mechanisms. Next slide, please. So accreditation and authorization is a FSMA requirement for federal IT systems. This slide won't necessarily apply to commercial packs, but it is a key requirement for IT systems placed within the federal government. So what that entails is categorizing the system as either a low, moderate, or high impact system, applying NIST SP 800-53 security controls that match the categorization, delivering a slew of documentation that has to be done well in advance of the test phase. And those include system security plans, privacy impact assessments, incident response plans, contingency plans, a lot going on there. And then you have to schedule security control assessments by either a agency side security control assessor, or the vendor may have to contract a third party to do an assessment as an independent evaluation of the system as far as it matching the security controls that were specified and outlined in the system security plan. So that entails all kinds of things, vulnerability scans, penetration testing, and everything else. So with the documentation, the security control assessments, the results of that gets turned over to a designated authorization authority within an agency that will issue an authority to operate, or an interim ATO. And then following that, there may be requirements then for the system to do continuous monitoring, which entails keeping documentations update, reviewing logs on a periodic basis, and doing vulnerability and penetration scans, so that you don't have to do an ATO other than, if you don't do continuous monitoring, then you have to do an ATO every 1 to 3 years or so. If the solution being offered is a FedRAMP PAC cloud service offering, then it's already been ATO through the FedRAMP process, and then there may be non-FedRAMP offerings that might have been gone through an ANA and received an ATO from another agency that could be leveraged. Next slide, please. So we move into the design phase. We start with taking everything we did in the planning phase and applying the requirements analysis, identify the equipment types, define connectivity configurations, and prepare installation documentation. As we say here, identify things that the client can furnish, and how do we set up staging and operation areas to do the implementation, and then we procure products, equipment, and materials. Next slide, please. This part of the requirements analysis entails assessing the facilities and access entry points. This includes categorizing entry point risk levels and identifying authentication factors and authentication mechanisms with guidance from NIST SP 800-116 and the FICAM roadmap and implementation guidance. Won't go into details on this, but Tony will be touching on this a little bit more in his part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So, crucial factor in the design phase for network systems is connectivity and associated security boundaries. We identify some of these key network access points and interfaces here as shown in the red in the diagram. They include, for example, user and user workstation access, connections with provisioning systems, PACS to controller interfaces, and PACS to certificate authority interfaces. And the main concern for these interfaces are they secure enough for their mission, and do they provide the bandwidth to handle the various transactions that support things like PIV card validation and authentication, certificate validation, and cardholder validation. Next slide, please. And the outcome of the design phase finally is the documentation that supports the remaining phases of the life cycle of the project. And that includes the installation, testing, and reaching an ATO and transitioning into the operations and maintenance phase. So the sample list of documents might include riser diagrams, reader and controller installation configuration, network configurations, settings, installation training materials, operator training, and support for client-side documentation and other instructions. And critically, what's not mentioned here is the documentation. So anyway, in summation with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Tony DeMellis, and he will discuss the remaining phases of the lifecycle approach.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll be discussing the implementation phase of a FICAM PACS project, albeit from an installer's perspective, but it will be informative for end users as well. I'll be keying in on those elements and functions that distinguish it from a conventional PACS. All of the project management details for conventional PACS will still apply for a FICAM PACS. Prior to deploying the head-end system to the site, and to avoid project delays, it would be advisable to set up the PACS at a staging area or in your offices so that the major functional components can be checked out and any necessary requirements can be taken care of in advance, such as updating software versions, testing reader authentication methods, etc. As the project progresses toward its testing and turnover phase, continue preparing the appropriate documentation and lifecycle management agreements to make the transition at that time smooth. Next slide, please. One of the first infrastructure components that needs to be addressed is the validation subsystem. It is recommended that this be an early discussion item with the organization and its IT representatives, as this is key to effectively executing the credential enrollment and registration process. Network connectivity is required, and most often than not, the IT policy will restrict external connectivity without proper approvals. It is a FICAM requirement to validate the identity before the credential is provisioned into the PACS, and an external network is required to perform this validation. Typically, you would want to enroll credentials while the hardware is being installed to allow operational cutover when ready. So a decision needs to be made at the start to perform the card provisioning with validation, or to cache the certificates to be validated later in a batch process. FICAM compliance requires that this be performed before provisioning or at least before going operational. Card authentication requires the internal network and can be performed without an external connection. But the initial revocation status check for enrollment and the required schedule checks will not be up to date without an external validation update, and therefore the connection. Next slide. During the planning and design phase, it was determined which locations would provide low, medium, and high assurance authentication. During the implementation phase, you would want to verify this, as things do change. Has there been any remodeling or new construction that impacts the plan design? If so, have the reader and assurance levels also changed? If so, plan to incorporate these into the turnover documents and as-built drawings. If major changes, plan to revisit the contract and possibly reset the contract expectations. Next slide. Address the creation of PACS access levels early, especially before credential enrollment and PACS registration begins. This is so that you can assign the access levels at the same time the credential is being registered. Otherwise, each credential would have to be revisited. The process of establishing the access levels should include coordination with the appropriate security personnel, and most likely they would need to coordinate with the department heads who are responsible for the given areas. If not possible or practical to do this before the credential is registered, establish written authorization to provide a minimum set of access levels approved by security and the area managers. Next slide, please. There are basically two methods to get the data from a smart card into a FICAM PACS, as was mentioned earlier. One of them, by the way, is not a manual entry of the basic FASTScan data, even if you know it. Individual card harvesting is one. The credential card holder individually authenticates and validates as part of the process. If not able to validate at the time of registration using the external network, the certs can be cached for bulk validation prior to operational use. Automated PACS provisioning is the second method. This method requires integration to the PACS and to an authoritative data source. If this method is used, test this sufficiently ahead of time to avoid what could become a significant delay, especially if software needs to be modified. Before major software updates are done, test the new release to assure it doesn't break the interface. Also, it would be valuable to confirm whether credential validation will be performed prior to sending the digital information to the PACS. That is, will it be the PACS side or the authoritative source side taking responsibility to perform validation? Next slide. Next, continue performing the registration plan as designed. Be sure to establish in advance or per contract who is to perform the credential registration process. Would it be a partial or sample set, or will it be all of the credentials, which could mean hundreds or thousands? Partial may include training client employees to continue the process if you're going to do a partial. Test all the anticipated card types, because not all PIV cards are created equal. Although they're supposed to be according to FIPS 201, and most are by design, but each agency has their own PIV issuance process, and PIV issuance operators could vary from the described process, causing variations in data encoding. In the field, this has led to difficulties harvesting the PIV data, causing the integrator to do troubleshooting thinking it's their equipment. While registration is continuing, you can move on and install the field equipment, make progress there. Next slide. Early in the implementation phase, test 1, 2, and 3-factor authentication mechanisms for performance and functionality. Verify access grants occur in accordance with the access level assignments and the privilege levels. Note the transaction times from card read to access grants. Is it acceptable, or has it varied from pre-installation bench tests? Next slide, please. Continue to march on with the installation of all access control panels, verifying network connectivity and configurations. Be sure to check if the reader licenses and certificates have been loaded. These are, by the way, hardware certs required by readers to allow them to perform the PGI challenge response process. The loading limits of FICAM readers to a controller should have been covered in the design, but since traditional and FICAM PACS differ, the processing loads and requirements differ. Sometimes this is overlooked by installers familiar with the brand, but not familiar with the PGI requirements. Be sure to follow the manufacturer's recommendations during the design phase and verify it's being followed in the field. Next slide, please. Okay, having covered some key FICAM-related PACS implementation elements, we'll briefly discuss the testing and the turnover phases. Next slide. Before executing tests with the owner or owner's representative, you want to be sure you performed your own functional testing, which will include the card enrollment process, all card usage scenarios, and operational performance, along with authentication mechanism tests. A partial functional test could also include access control functions, workflow processes, and systems integration functions with other subsystems like the video and alarm monitoring systems. And don't forget to keep up with that daunting punch list that often holds up project acceptance. Work on that as you go. Next slide. Part of the project closeout, of course, is to provide training, both for operators and administrators. This phase also covers the closed-out documentation to include the training documents, as-built drawings, operation, and maintenance manuals, etc. Next slide, please. All right, I will not spend much time on the next 3 slides because these are traditional in nature and typical of all conventional PACS projects as well. You'll be training those that will be operating the system, administering the system, and performing in-house technical troubleshooting to the level agreed to with the owner. Hands-on training is better than classroom, with documentation for later reference and meeting with the administrators to identify key area applicable to them, avoid spending time on non-relevant topics. Next slide. For technical training, cover the degree of training per the expectations of the organization's technical staff, and procedurally how and to whom service calls are to be made. A clear set of rules of engagement oftentimes helps identifying contract-related work versus out-of-contract work. For third-tier support, that may involve a request to connect from an outside source, like the manufacturer. Consider this possibility in advance and have an action plan for it. Most federal government facilities will not allow remote connections. Next slide. This slide shows some typical list of general category items included in the turnover process. Be sure to document key dates and official start of warranty. If partial acceptance was allowed, was it for beneficial use and thus warranty goes into effect then, or was it a preliminary acceptance to allow the contract to move forward and thus one warranty date is to be honored? Whichever it is, all parties should be on the same page. Next slide. I'll conclude my portion of the presentation by referencing one of the most significant impacts to the PACS industry that we have recently seen. The other major one, of course, being the use of PKI for validation and authentication. And it was mentioned earlier, and that is that the FICAN PACS is now considered part of the federal IT inventory, and as such governed by the IT Dynamics Risk Management Framework and CDM, spoken of by Mark earlier. CDM says that we will not simply do logical threat assessments periodically, but to do them continuously, and if threats are detected, to mitigate them. We need tools to help us do this, and the use of these tools are now mandated. I'd like to share one document that speaks to CDM, and particularly Volume 2 of this set of documents, which addresses requirements. So keep informed because it will be coming to a PACS near you. Next slide. This diagram shows the phases of CDM. Looking at the lower blue section, you can see that a boundary is identified, and our PACS data falls into this category, as well as the other areas as well. The phases are grouped into the category shown, what's on the network, who is on the network, what is happening on the network, and how is the data protected. Next slide, please. The last slide is to bring to your attention bound-P requirements, which specifically includes the monitoring and management of the PACS in the context of CDM. I've provided the URL for those who wish to download it and get a jump start on CDM. And with that, I thank you, and I now turn it back over to Lars.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Mark, for your excellent and very informative and interesting material. I think that this is something that will be visited many times to come. And that brings us towards the end of session 5, which was talking about the deployment and implementation. Our next session is going to be presented on April 19th, and that will be lessons learned. That will be a different format. There will be a discussion panel, and for that we have members of the federal end user, federal community. We have a couple of system manufacturers, and we have a few system integrators. They will all discuss issues that has come up and how they were resolved. And for those of you who are on this webinar here today, I encourage you to send in to lsunaborn@securetechalliance.org if you have any suggestions. We are going to send out a little survey to see if there are any one of you who have a specific topic that you would like the panel to discuss. As I said, there will be a discussion forum. There will be no PowerPoint presentation during that. And for this now, I am going to turn the session over to Randy and to address the Q&A. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Lars, and thank you to Tony Damalos and Mark Dale for your excellent presentations. We do have a few minutes for questions, and if you have not submitted a question yet, please do now using the dashboard that comes with the GoToWebinar, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. The first question is directed towards Mark. Is there a data standard or interface specification in place for new FICAM PACS compliant PACS solution?
Is there a new requirements for PACS solutions?
Is there a data standard or interface specification that can be leveraged for a new FICAM compliant PACS solution? I asked the questioner if they were referring to the network connection for the certificates, but I didn't get an answer to that, so I'm not quite clear if that's the right point of the question, but you might know.
Yeah, well, I guess I can touch about the different interfaces. I mean, certainly there's not going to be anything necessarily new for PIV card authentication and stuff along those lines. What could be coming soon, though, is the use of mobile devices for actually doing physical access control, which is kind of an interesting area. For certificate authorities, there are standard protocols to interface with them, and some certificate authorities have proprietary protocols to how to set that up. So there's no mandate that says exactly which protocol a certificate authority has to use. So, but there are standard ones that they could use. Let's see, what other interfaces are we talking about? Anything that has to do with provisioning from an external source, those are going to be customized based upon the capabilities of the authoritative data source, so whether it's an identity management system or a CMS, and then also with the PACS system on their being able to handle that interface. On the PACS side, PACS usually have, hey, if you want to put something into my system, this is my protocol, you follow it. And so that's pretty much the environment there. And I'm hoping I answered the question. So.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Tony, this question's for you. Can we substitute one approved PIV reader for another approved PIV reader if we wanted to make a change?
There are two answers to that. One is driven by the approved product list and the process by which organizations are to acquire FICAM PACS systems. In that context, there are three major components that make up a solution: the PACS infrastructure, the validation system, and the PIV reader. And the team that submits it to the approved product list includes a specific reader, and substituting a reader that is not on that same list or a group of listings with that other two package components, the validation and the PACS infrastructure, is not going to be necessarily a listed solution. So from a government perspective, the answer is no. From a technical perspective, you might see certain communication standards, RS-45, OSDP, various buzzwords like that, that each reader also supports, but the protocols and some of the other things that might be different by design within the manufacturer allow various features may not be the same, and therefore you can have a risk by having some interoperability issues and some operational problems. So it would be risky to do that from two perspectives, and I would not necessarily recommend it unless that particular reader is also on the list with that manufacturer.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Next question, I think, is also for you, Tony. For a validation system configuration, is there more than one architecture or configuration permitted?
The answer to that is yes. From my perspective and the way that I like to look at it, Simplistically, I categorize them into like three approaches. One approach is to use an external component or device for interfacing into the network to handle the authentication. Typically, these outboard modules, and many are familiar with some like the PAM, by HID, for example. That would be an example of a third-party component or an outboard solution that a two-way communication type reader listed to work with that particular module tied to the network brings the data for validation up to the validation software. So one configuration architecture includes outboard components. The results of that validation are then provisioned traditionally into the packs after that process. A second approach is to send the data through a controller transparently to the software. So you eliminate the third-party component. You don't have connectivity with that, but the controller is just a traffic cop. It takes the request for authentication and communicates it through the controller, handing it back to the validation software at the back end, and then the answer comes back through the controller again and responds to the reader and the card for that authentication process. In that context, it's all being done at the back end, where the controller is participating only as a pass-through. The third architecture is where you've taken some of that validation processing activity and loaded into a new controller, which is happening today. Most next generation products are now embedding the authentication firmware in the controller. And now you have that architecture configuration where the reader actually communicates with the controller then communicates with the network validation software in the back end. But if you lose that communication to the back end, having that firmware in the controller gives you the advantage of being able to continue the authentication process even without the back end there, albeit you won't get the latest and greatest replication list until you get online and do that background check again and refresh the controller. Until then, though, you can still perform card authentication. So those three represent the three approaches to architecturing the validation system.
Great, thank you, Tony. This next question, I guess, is open for either of you. Maybe we'll start with Mark first. If Tony, you'd like to add something, please do. What opportunities are there left at this time for PIV-enabled packs purchases within the federal government?
Actually, for my company, we keep track of what's going on, certainly, and the point of interest here is the federal business opportunities, FedBizOps, FBO.gov. Certainly, that's where the solicitations are posted, and over this, it's been even past years, whatever, I get notifications, but even beginning of the year, there are still issues or solicitations posted for opportunities in that area. If you want to do searches, I found using HSPD12 is a better search than using packs within FBO.gov. But the other thing too is the government and facilities are probably a little more dynamic than people realize. Take, for example, we interface with the National Science Foundation. They just moved into a new facility in Alexandria, Virginia last year, and so there was a whole new opportunity there for a new PAC system. So there are areas like that, and the dynamics there across the board that are still going on, and still agencies that have to catch up.
All right, I can add by saying, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, I was going to add that the answer from my perspective is looking at it in two ways again. One being a few years ago, where the FIPS and the FICAM solution for a FICAM PACS offered the smart readers and those communication validation processes that we did not know of in the conventional sense, but knew them then when FIPS came out. However, today, we have new access management peripherals that are driving new technologies, such as bring your own device, the mobile technology platform that are authenticating devices with the right credentials. Identity management is taking on a variety of features driven by new technologies. So as the customers want to take advantage of these features and benefits and efficiencies, they're going to want to either upgrade or modify their PAC systems, and that will just keep driving the opportunities more and more. In the first phase, where we had the traditional approach, we would like to think that all PACs have been upgraded, but that's not true. There are many, many PACs that have not yet caught up in the first phase, or wave, I should say, of migrating them to a FICAM PACs. And when that happens, yes, there'll be opportunities to now catch up and implement the new system, as well as moving forward for the new technologies. So look at the platforms you're considering and evaluating, and look at the future and see which platform will get you there the quickest.
I think I'd like to add to Mark's comment there too, and to yours too, Tony. I believe there's going to be many years before we get to the point where even half of the agency location has been upgraded to compliant PACs. We see some really good examples of GSA, Public Building Service, PBS. They're moving aggressively to upgrade their facilities nationwide to a system. There are a few other agencies, but they're small. There's still today a small portion of agencies and agency locations that have compliant PACs. So there's a lot of work ahead of us.
And so I have a comment actually from one of our government audience members on today's webinar to the same question. And his comment is that there are, yes, plenty of opportunities yet for PACs systems, but the challenge continues to be for federal agencies to achieve funding to perform the appropriate procurements. So let's hope that we are done with continuing resolutions, and we have a long-term funding opportunity coming towards us pretty soon, so that we can start to catch up on some of that backlog of PAC systems that do need to be updated or replaced. Okay, we have time for one or two more questions. One question here. Tony, can I use a hotel-style door lock solution to achieve a FICAM compliant installation?
If there's one out there, I don't know about it. The biggest issue is that you still can't get away from having PGI authentication as a requirement. The days of being able to use a Chewit, and there have been some products on the market back then that fell under the Chewit category, and transmitting that data was possible with either a small unit on the wall or a wireless unit. With that Chewit authentication mechanism being deprecated, CAC or CAKE being the certificate for wireless and contactless, I don't see how that is possible. Again, technology is always around the corner, but my last look at the approved product list, which is a driving force of what you can use, and the technology that's required to process this and do the validation checks, I've not seen it.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour now, so we're going to have to end today's webinar. I want to thank you again to our audience for participating today, and to our three speakers for their great presentations. Please make a note of the past webinars and the final upcoming webinar in this series, which is scheduled for April 19th. Today's participants will get an email from the Secure Technology Alliance with a link to the recordings and the content presented today. And I believe that site will also give you access to the past webinar series. You're welcome to share that link and information to other colleagues in your organization who may have missed today's webinar presentation, so that more people can get an opportunity to hear this great content. So thank you for participating. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll sign off for now.